Gentlemen, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, we're here to talk AI. And just to put everything in perspective, Yoshua believes, just to make it broad, that the risk of AI potentially putting us into extinction should be considered a global risk like we look at pandemics and nuclear war. Eric is super, super excited about AI. So that's where the two of them are coming from.
I think, by the way, he invented half of this, so
Yes.
Let's start with him.
Yes, and he invented half of it. November 2022 is when so many of us here in this room first got AI on the mind, right? When OpenAI launched ChatGPT and it entered all of our lives. Fast forward November 2022 until today, what has been the most exciting, what's been the most positive in your mind?
What's the most positive is that there's growing awareness, both of the positive capabilities, but also the dangers. And that is the most important thing that needs to continue happening so that we act with caution so we can benefit from what AI can bring, but not mess up our democracy, our society, or even destroy humanity.
Well, I'm just going to disagree. I think what we should do is run full blast without any guardrails whatsoever. No, I'm being facetious. The potential for AI is so profound in terms of its ability, for example, an AI doctor, an AI tutor. Think of all of the problems that we have in society that I worry that we're going to somehow slow this thing down. I'd much rather develop it as fast as we can. I think it's an American story at the moment, along with our partner Canada and a few others, and I want us to take advantage of that. What you're seeing now is three different things happening at once. Today you're thinking language to language, but very, very quickly you're going to see what are called infinite context windows, where you can ask it any question. It can give you lots of recipes and things to do. You can develop agents which learn things. And then finally, you can have a programmer that does what you want by telling it what you want and it'll write code for you. These are very powerful and very exciting.
The issue is all of that power, which comes from intelligence, the intellectual cognitive capabilities that are growing, are dual use, as you know. And there's no way to separate the ability of AI to do something very impactful from what are the goals that we ask the AI. And if we can't find a way to control that, to make sure that AI is going to act in a moral way, that it's not going to fall into the hands of people who might, turn it against us, that we know how to design it so that, there's going to be no accident where it becomes autonomous and dangerous, then all of these good things are wasted, right? So we absolutely need to clear the fog. Right now, scientists really have no idea how to build an AI that will do what we want, that will behave according to our norms, our laws, our values, and that is a big problem.
But we all have different values. So who decides what's a moral way?
There is, in principle, a very easy answer. We already have this problem. It's called democracy.
And it's at risk.
It's at risk because of AI and other things, but yes. I wouldn't trust an AI to decide for humanity what is right and wrong. We have to be the ones taking those decisions, collectively, of course.
But again, who's the we?
Well, this is a question of governance, right? So this is a question that we answer with our democratic institutions. We create a regulator to put guardrails. We decide, what are the incentives for organizations building these things. These are collective decisions, normally through our governments. This is the role of government in a world where democracy works, of course.
So I think it's important to talk about human-driven actions and computer-driven actions. And I'm going to draw a hard line between humans asking the AI to do stuff, which we can discuss, and the AI doing things on its own. And I think the latter is incredibly dangerous. So there's scenarios where agents begin to talk to each other and they begin planning, and they might be planning in their own language, a language that we as humans don't understand.
Hold on, who are agents?
An agent is a computer program that's designed to do for an action, that does an action. It knows a bunch of stuff, it can perform something. And in this context, they're typically language invoked with language outcomes, but they can turn knobs, write code, that sort of thing. So the point at which agents can talk to each other in a language we don't understand, do you know what we should do? Unplug the computers, right? It's just not okay. So there are limits,
Yes.
right? So, and
We call them red lines.
red lines.
And there are a number of these, like
And you and I actually have worked on this in a number of cases, and I think we agree on what the red lines are. I think the way to say this,
even the Chinese agree on the red lines.
yeah, in general, I think everyone agrees: unplug the computers, go home, have coffee, or what have you. But that's humans need to control these things. The problem is we don't trust all of the humans. And we have lots of evidence that they're psychotic and illegal and terrorist humans and so forth. And there's plenty of potential for misuse. The most obvious one has to do with what is called open source, where the models that are part of this, and you heard from Sam, who's of course brilliant, their model is closed. But there are other places where they're building almost as good open models which can be modified. And that's a danger. We don't fully understand how to control it.
And if I could add something here that is very important to understand. Once such a model is shared with the world, all the safety protections that have been put to make sure it doesn't get used to build weapons can very, very easily be removed with very little hardware, somebody that anybody could do almost. And we won't even know because it can happen anywhere in the world. Another thing I want to add is there's a connection between the dangerous misuse and the loss of control. And one example scenario is, let's say an organization in North Korea, uses one of our open source models. They tune it to do something really bad, and they tune it so that it can actually cross one of these red lines, like do not reproduce yourself. Because that would be a way to have a lot more impact on our infrastructure, say for cyber attacks or other things like this. But while doing so, crossing the red lines in order to achieve a human bad goal, they may unleash the loss of control that we're trying to avoid. So yes, these are different scenarios, but one can create the other. And the good news, I want to be optimistic. I think that there's still a window of opportunity to look for scientific solutions to these problems. That if we could design AI systems that have inhibitions, that cannot do bad things, and there are a number of research groups in the world exploring these questions, we would be much better off. We would still have to deal with, say, open source, and we'd still have to deal with bad actors stealing the information. But if we can build superhuman AI systems that are moral, then they could be our protectors in case a rogue AI emerges.
Eric, can we go back to something you said a moment ago where you said when we get to this level, everyone will agree we'll unplug the computers. Will everyone agree? Because these are companies, highly competitive companies, in the most competitive races to get ahead in AI. So will they really unplug the computers or not, given where we are?
So there's pretty general agreement within the industry on the core issues that Yoshua has been talking about. So the general concern is, which you say even better than I, is that these companies are going to compete, and in the competition, one might cut corners. Right, that's a regulatory issue in most industries. You cut corners to get an advantage. So I think it's reasonable to expect that governments will understand this. Since the last time we've talked about AI, starting in November of this past year, the UK and then the US have had a series of these AI safety summits. Of the countries that are farthest along, the UK is the farthest along. They have a program, they're doing testing, they're working on regulations. All of the other proper countries, including Canada, Korea, France, and so forth, are all kind of working in this space.
And we have a new AI safety institute in Canada.
In fact,
and there's one in Japan.
In fact, announced a few weeks ago.
Exactly.
Right? And you're part of that. There's a big Japan effort. There's also a conversation with the Chinese, which I'm a member of, on the same subjects. So I think what you're seeing the government this stuff is hard enough for us to understand. You can imagine how hard it is for the government to understand. We are busy educating them on these issues. And this is a strange case where the industry is asking for regulation. And
They though?
Yeah, the key leaders, I know because I talked to them. The key leaders are saying, this is a problem.
They might say one thing one day and something that seems to be in contradiction the other day. So it is tricky because companies are in this race to win, and at the same time, the individuals in those companies are human. They don't want catastrophes to happen. So these two forces are, mingling.
So I'm reasonably confident that the threat space is understood in the sense that it goes roughly as follows. The current models are growing at roughly 4 times per generation. Essentially, they're called scaling laws. And they haven't shown any degradation in performance. In other words, it just looks, if you do more and more and more, you get better and better and better. Eventually, you hit declining returns. We haven't seen that yet. So most people that I've talked to and the teams that I manage believe we've got another couple of rounds before we really face these issues. Maybe it's 2 rounds, maybe it's 3 rounds, and a round is like 18 months. So that tells you have 3 to 5 years collectively to get our act together on your challenge. Do you agree with that time?
Quick, very likely, we don't know, but that's very fast. And we don't have, for example, laws like taking the binding executive order into something more solid in Congress. Most countries don't have any things in place to, for example, force the companies to secure their systems so that they're not going to be easily stolen by bad actors. There are many things that need to happen quickly so that when we get to these AI systems that are really dangerous, we have done our best to reduce the risks.
So I'm pretty optimistic that at least the Western countries that I've talked to will put these laws in place or rules in place or liabilities in place along these lines. I'm actually much, much more worried about the institutions and individuals that we don't have control over. The large American companies are all under control because everyone's watching them, right? There's plenty of groups, however, and terrible things occur in darkness. And so you have the scenario that you described about open source. The open source community, of which I'm clearly a member and my whole career is dependent upon it, and I care a lot about it, is moving very, very quickly right behind these large companies and doing a fantastic job. So if you have a proliferation problem, you're going to have a proliferation problem of that nature. I was in China last year, and of course I talked to all the engineers. The political leaders won't answer any questions because they don't have it on their script. But if you ask an engineer anywhere in the world a very precise question, they will give you a very precise answer. And so I asked them, how do you start your training? And they all start from open source, right? So we understand where they are, and that's how China will evolve.
We don't expect our lawmakers, our government to be experts. But I think the average person out there, one of the reasons they're so scared about AI is we don't have a lot of confidence in our government, right? We look at social media, what's happened, the lack of regulation. There's a hearing here, a hearing there, it's a show, and nothing comes of it. Do you believe, they're obviously not experts, but our government has an idea of what AI is and the risks ahead?
I think right now the White House around the world is the place where there's the greatest understanding of the risks. And there is an understanding that in order to deal with these dangers we're talking about, governments need to build up the knowledge, the expertise, the talent in-house. They can also work with external organizations.
Is that happening?
It is happening. There are nonprofits, for example, working on building what's called evaluations to see whether an AI could have dangerous capabilities, for example. So governments should recruit a lot more, should be flexible to make sure they can attract those people, but can also work with other parties, and I think should also work with other governments around the world, because we're not going to solve these problems even if we do all the right things here in the US. A very dangerous AI coming up in another country can harm us here. So we have to gradually move towards an international coordination. It's starting, but we need to accelerate that process.
One of the things to know is that these training runs take so much power and so much computing that it's probable that the secret people know where they are, right? So even if somebody were not compliant, the various people who watch for national security probably know. I don't know, but I guess that. And in any case, in the US, the Senate held a series of hearings, which I was a part of, involving 2 Republican senators and 2 Democratic senators, that really advanced the conversation. The House is doing something similar. Everything has just ground to a halt because it's an election year. So what that tells me, as a pragmatic thing, is nothing will now happen until 2025. And the good news is we have some time. These test and evaluation frameworks are being funded and invented. There's an agreement that the various companies should share their test and evaluation, not their code, but the things they test against. There's an agreement verbally among all the companies to do this. None of this addresses your fundamental concern, but it's an example of the series of steps.
It's something we need to do,
right.
But it's not sufficient.
Right. So these things are occurring, and there are significant analysis being done along the lines of your things. There's a well-known paper that DeepMind did a few months ago, which studied the question of extreme risks. And I define extreme risk as 15,000 or more people dead as opposed to an individual person harmed, which is arbitrary. And they did a categorization of them, and the biggest extreme risks are things like cyber attacks and biological attacks. And the question that the paper asks, and I'll just give them credit for this, is how do we make sure these systems don't get access to weapons in any form? So this gets back to your earlier point about securing the models. So the model costs $100 million to build. You can put it on a hard drive. It better not be possible to exfiltrate the model. Things like this. There's a long list like that that's in preparation.
There are also discussions about changing the way we build hardware, the chips that are necessary for AI. If we could build them in such a way that we can trace them, we would know if there's a big concentration of these chips somewhere in the world. We could also make sure that only software that has been licensed, that has the right safety protocols, is allowed to run. It doesn't exist yet, but these are the kinds of things that are important to think about. We need to think about what can go wrong, and there are many different scenarios, and what are the sorts of mitigations that are feasible within the next few years.
We're not an AI audience, so I just want to give a basic example and have you help us understand how we should see it, right? Every day, every minute, it's like there's a new technology. This week alone, I think it was Microsoft came out with a technology. They take one single photo of you, they add a voice component, and then it's you talking, saying words you have never said. Is this something we should be excited about or deadly terrified?
The latter. I mean, we have elections coming. You can see how this could be misused. I've seen recently people imitating me with my voice, and I, quote unquote, was saying things totally, the contrary of what I would say, and you couldn't make the difference. I mean, these things are getting better, and it's going to be even more credible next year because the systems are trained more, they're bigger. So we need to think about mitigation. So there are a number of things that have been thought about, but there's no very easy answer. One of the things that I think we should go towards is that entities, people who put material on social media, on the internet, should be identifiable or at least known in a unique way, so that if somebody does something essentially criminal, we can trace them back. Now, it's easier said than done. There are costs and potentially downsides, but we need to think of things like this to make it harder for bad actors to exploit the current internet system, the social media, and so on, to basically destabilize our democracies.
But many of these technologies are so exciting, they're so cool, they're so much fun. When the general public gets access to them, they don't hear or care about the risks. They want to make a video of their friends saying ridiculous things. How do you alert people that they need to care more?
The same thing, I've talked about threats to democracy, but the same thing is being used to create child pornography, right? There are frauds that cost millions and millions of dollars that are happening because you can imitate people, their voice, their face. So I think it's pretty urgent that we take the issue of how AI can be misused seriously, and we have to change things in the way we organized in order to deal with that.
The misinformation tools that you're describing are in open source and are being used by bad actors around the world, including nation states, China, North Korea, et cetera, et cetera. So most people will encounter misinformation on social media because most people are on social media. So the burden...
And if it's information they like, they'll believe it.
So, and the social media companies, as a general rule, have a conflict of interest because on the one hand, they want accuracy, but they also want revenue. And the best way to increase revenue is to increase engagement. The best way to increase engagement is with outrage. So if we take you and we have you say something outrageous, you're going to get a lot more views than your normal professorial speeches, if I may say that. And so this is a cheapening of discussion in a democracy. So the technical solutions are exactly as Yoshua said. You need to mark the content from where it came from, and you need to also know who the users are so you can hold them accountable. The question as to how the social media companies should work is an issue for debate in a democracy. Now, I'm sufficiently optimistic that I think our democracy will face this challenge and get through it. We faced television and other sort of changes in the body politic. But the fact of the matter is, right now, people have been trained since birth to believe what they hear and what they see. And it is a significant change for every human being to learn that the majority of what you see may or may not be. Yeah. Learning to be critical of what you're seeing, which seems to be very much missing in this political year in America, seems like a really key component.
And we're going to need training, right? We're going to need to see lots of examples of these things to become suspicious. Things that look like maybe it's too good to be true, or it doesn't match your expectations. The issue I see with, for example, putting the right rules in social media is, as you said, it's going to create costs for them and friction. So, for example, in the case of accounts, they want it to be easy for people to create new accounts because, of course, that's more money. So they're not going to do it because they compete with other social media until we create a level playing field for all the social media.
What I'm trying to say is that at some level there will be some forms of regulation, at least on the extreme harms here. But I think the most important thing to say is that we will get through this at this level because these are identifiable problems. Yeah. The real issues go roughly like this. You've trained a model, and the model has learned something, but it hasn't the ability to tell you what it knows. Okay, so it's learned something, and you ask it what it learned, and it doesn't know how to tell you what it learned. So if you release it, right, you run the risk of catastrophe. If you don't release it, you also run the issue of catastrophe because there's no way to test it. But if you test it, then you have the catastrophe. There's a conundrum. So there are a whole bunch of techniques that the industry has arrived at. Today, what they do is what is called red teaming, where they get a whole bunch of super smart people and they imagine what the system might know and they test it. But eventually, that'll have to be replaced either by your research work, which is in the area of provably secure systems, or by AI systems that outsmart the AI systems that have learned something. And the industry believes all of these things that need to be provided.
The sobering thing, though, is that for now, these evaluations that we have and the safety protections that companies have put have all been defeated by academics or hackers. Just shortly after one of these models comes out, people find a way to bypass the protections. So if we don't solve this problem quickly before we get to really dangerous AI systems that have a lot of knowledge that could be exploited for bad, we are in trouble.
You heard it here, 3 to 5 years.
And this science nonfiction horror movie was brought to you by Time Magazine. Thank you for having us.